타오비블라브송 디비시타카 타오블라브송 디비시타한데 나기 타야게 원하다면 이게 셋리미트라 쇼세카웨 야게나다 게군데 그게서 드리데베 카운트인데 바다르 그디 두스나 하니추 이게 나그 전대원을 그리고 이제 나 호딘 그리지 대원을 그리고 심지어할 때나 그린다 카운트인데 에조티 데리케인 저 알게 다시 아유는 디제트 안나송 테나갈 그다 고티니 콜라보츠노 티고 자케 콜라보츠노 티고자 디는 게테나갈 게탄데 군인네 손레 고자 고나 오레 콜나 손레 이고가 친구 튜인 고자 테나갈 게탄데 디제트 아다갈 게타 디제트 아다나갈 그다 고자 아이다니네 손고 온데 히야라 그다 Litin zona ke azo kolale ikuze kichukuze hitokuze nesu eta una de kewe de kera la keta kuze to de kera sur nesu ala la keta ni I panu isinere ke ya kera ke kla yunta na wa kana yunta tsina de tana no tana thaki kani ina ka mari kola ni isin tenteka yuni ya kera ketana wa ketana kani sena tsetene tenara untena hike tsayako ni sinda harne sogal sutta ko atene sentene thara inte masiwa ande
Masi, please be seated. Members, Minister's statement. Minister of Status of Women. Oh, sorry.
Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to waive Rule 36(4) so that all minister statements provided to the clerk can be delivered today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Members seeking unanimous consent to waive Rule 32(4) for all statements to be filed today. Are there any nays? There are no nays. Minister's statement. Minister responsible for Status of Women.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday, a discussion paper tabled by the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly titled Temporary Special Measures to Increase the Participation of Women in the Northwest Territories Legislative Assembly was tabled. On March 8, 2018, a motion was adopted by the Legislative Assembly establishing a goal of increasing the representation of women in the Legislative Assembly to 20% by 2023 and 30% by 2027. It was my honour to second this motion made by the member for Yellowknife Centre, MLA Julie Green. Members understand that the White Paper is intended to generate discussion on the advancement of these goals. We must take the opportunity to discuss our common objective set out in the mandate to support initiatives designed to increase the number of women running for elected office in the Northwest Territories. Women's voices are important in leadership at all levels of government, community, territorial, federal and Indigenous governments. Advancing women's participation in a range of forums is crucial to the political and social development of our territory. Mr. Speaker, the Women's Advisory Unit and the Department of Executive and Indigenous Affairs have been working throughout the 18th Legislative Assembly on measures designed to increase the number of women in leadership. Those who know me know that I am passionate about getting more women into leadership roles. I take every opportunity I can to promote women in leadership at all levels and in any form available. I know that my colleague, the member from Yellowknife Centre, also promotes this work to the best of her ability. However, Mr. Speaker, we cannot do this work alone, nor should we. It's imperative that everyone works together to advance women's representation in leadership positions. As the minister responsible for the status of women, I am glad to see such a high level of interest in the representation of women in this House. I call on the men in the House to support this movement and engage in these very important conversations. I look forward to advancing the discussion in this Legislative Assembly and seeing real change throughout the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Minister statement. Minister Ike Goodani, the Minister Environment and Natural Resources.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the government in Northwest Territories made a mandate commitment to develop a territorial climate change strategy that takes into account northern energy demands and the cost of living while reflecting international and national commitments to lower greenhouse gas emissions. Earlier this month, the GNWT publicly released the 2030 NWT Climate Change Strategic Framework, our government's coordinated, comprehensive response to mitigating and adapting to climate change. Working alongside the 2030 Energy Strategy and the NWT Petroleum Resources Strategy, the Climate Change Strategic Framework provides the roadmap that will enable the Northwest Territories to transition to a strong, healthy economy that is less dependent on fossil fuels and supports our residents in becoming more resilient and adaptive to climate change. Our government recognizes the concerns NWT residents have about the impacts of climate change along with cost of living. This framework takes into account our unique northern energy needs while aligning with international and national commitments to lowering greenhouse gas emissions, understanding the impacts of climate change in the north, and supporting our communities in becoming more resilient to these changes. Mr. Speaker, Canada has committed to a 30% reduction in annual greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. The GNWT has been actively working to address climate change and reduce greenhouse gas emissions for years and has set a consistent target for the Northwest Territories to ensure we are contributing to the goals outlined in the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change. Canada has expressed support for our plan, affirming that we are indeed doing our part to effectively and proportionately reduce our emissions by 2030. The GNWT recognizes that we must also ensure our economy remains strong and viable as we take concrete actions to lower our dependence on fossil fuels and promote clean growth. Our government's united approach to addressing our unique northern needs in regard to energy and climate change will accomplish this. Mr. Speaker, the Climate Change Strategic Framework provides the GNWT with a long-term, comprehensive and coordinated response to climate change outlined in 3 goals. The first goal is to transition to an economy that is less dependent on fossil fuels, thereby reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 30% below 2005 levels by 2030. These actions we will take to achieve this are outlined in the 2030 Energy Strategy, which serves as a primary mechanism for reducing our greenhouse gas emissions related to energy supply and consumption. The framework will focus on tracking and reporting our progress. The second goal of the framework is to increase our understanding of climate change impacts in the NWT, whether on the natural environment, residents' health and safety, culture and heritage, or infrastructure. Developing a better understanding of current and future impacts and opportunities will support informed decision-making at all levels. The third goal is to build resilience and adapt to a changing climate. We need to find ways to adjust to changes that are occurring by adapting our planning and operational activities. An action plan for achieving the Climate Change Strategic Framework 3 goals is under development, and the public will be engaged on it over the summer. Once developed, the action plan will be implemented over the next 5 years through partnerships with Indigenous, community and federal governments, along with non-government and industry stakeholders. As the lead department responsible for climate change, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources will provide strong leadership on related coordination within the NWT and with other provinces, territories, and the federal government to implement the action plan. Mr. Speaker, the GNWT remains committed to addressing the threats climate change poses to the sustainability of our communities and the way of life of our residents. Though we have already invested millions in adaptation efforts related to climate change, alternative energy projects, energy retrofits, improved transportation infrastructure, and improved building standards, the GNWT recognizes that significant adaptation projects and reductions in greenhouse gas emissions cannot be realized without substantial federal funding, and we will continue to pursue funding opportunities as they arise. I look forward to working with Northerners to establish a lower carbon economy, to increase our knowledge of climate impacts, and to build up our resiliency in the face of a changing climate. We know that there is still work to be done, and it will take time to achieve. But with a clear plan and by working together, we can support a sustainable future that will benefit from this long-term vision for generations to come. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Minister statement. Minister Goodine, the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our government has committed in its mandate to pursue innovative ways to prevent and reduce crime. The dedicated employees of the Department of Justice, in particular our frontline corrections professionals, know firsthand how important it is that our programs and services focus on the root causes that lead to an individual coming into contact with the justice system. Within our correctional facilities, programs are delivered in a way that recognize the importance of culture and take into consideration the short time that most territorial inmates are incarcerated. Our corrections staff work with inmates to ensure that the time they spend in custody promotes their successful reintegration back into the communities. After hearing feedback from MLAs, past and present inmates, and through the Auditor General's report regarding programming at the North Slave Correctional Centre, the Corrections Service has worked hard to develop basic life and pre-employment skills of inmates and incorporate cultural elements into our programs. Traditional healing programs will move from being offered inside the facility to being offered in the yard of the North Slave Correctional Centre now that the security upgrades are complete. We are also offering a number of programs at many of our corrections facilities and recognize the importance of Indigenous cultures and traditions. The substance abuse management, violence prevention, living without violence, and the respectful relations programs are all evidence-based programs aimed at supporting inmates to become aware of the triggers that lead them to engage in unhealthy and unsafe behaviors. Traditional liaison officers or elders are also participate in these programs to help inmates reflect on their culture and learning. Since being launched in 2016, the Substance Abuse Management Program has been delivered 23 times in correctional facilities and probation offices in Yellowknife, Hay River, Port Province, and Inuvik. The Corrections Service has also delivered 2 of these programs specifically for women, one at the Fort Smith Correctional Complex Women's Unit and another at the Yellowknife Probation Office. Since its launch in 2017, the violence prevention and the living without violence programs have been delivered 20 times, including 5 times in probation offices in Yellowknife, Inuvik, Port McPherson, Fort Good Hope, and Hay River. The Respectful Relations Program also launched last year and has been delivered 10 times, 5 of which were delivered in probation offices in Yellowknife, Mexico, Inuvik, and Hay River. The South Mackenzie Correctional Centers offers a range of in-house addictions programs unique to that facility. The addictions counselor and traditional liaison officers deliver several programs, including a 2-week addictions program based on Indigenous cultures, values, and beliefs. They also offer a 4-week pre-treatment healing program where clients learn medicine wheel teachings and about how their behaviors can impact their family and their community. This program, along with the Red Road to Freedom program, teaches inmates that the 4 aspects of the medicine wheel, emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual, that need to be kept in balance when dealing with issues in their lives like substance abuse. In addition to the programs that are being delivered to those individuals who are in the justice system, changes to the release planning process have made it possible for case managers to look for community programming options for inmates upon release. Where possible, clients are matched with similar programming so that they can continue to build the skills that are needed to prevent and reduce crime and harm in their lives. Mr. Speaker, we also recognize the importance of offering programs and opportunities that support inmates in meeting their educational goals. Through our on-site instructors who work closely with local high schools and colleges, the Corrections Service is able to offer a range of educational programming. Inmates can access programs that include adult literacy, basic education, general education development, high school and exam preparation, trades exam preparation, life skills, and assistance with pursuing or registration into post-secondary courses. I am pleased to report that over the past year, approximately 130 inmates have taken part in education programming within our adult correctional facilities. Mr. Speaker, our goal is to prepare inmates for their eventual rehabilitation and reintegration back into their communities. The Department of Justice and the entire Corrections Service has been working hard to make sure that the programming and supports that we offer help to address the root causes of crime. This has meant committing to making sure that culturally appropriate programming is in place and to look at new ways to help inmates continue with similar programming in their communities upon their release. Through these efforts and the continued partnerships we have with other departments and stakeholders, we are making a difference in lives of Northerners and are helping to create safer, healthier communities in the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Minister's statement. Minister Ike Goodani, the Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, June is Senior Citizens Month. I encourage all Northerners to join me in recognizing and celebrating the valuable contributions that seniors and elders make within our families and our communities. In the Northwest Territories, our seniors and elders are the fastest growing segment of our population. Through our Elders, Our Communities framework and the Continuing Care Services Action Plan, our government is working to support our seniors and elders to live in their own homes and communities for as long as possible and to ensure that adequate supports are available for them when they can no longer do so. We have also recently published an updated edition of the Seniors Information Handbook, which provides a comprehensive list of programs and services that seniors and their caregivers can access towards making informed decisions that can help them remain independent and active in their home communities. Senior Citizens Month is one way that our society recognizes and appreciates the valuable contributions that our seniors and elders make to the fabric of our communities. This Recognition Month also serves to highlight important issues facing our seniors and elders. And to that end, I'd like to highlight 2 special days within the Senior Citizens Month. Today is June 1st. Today is Intergenerational Day, and I encourage Northwest Territories residents to reflect on the importance that intergenerational relationships have had in their own lives. Elders represent the heart and soul of our communities. They are respected for their knowledge, their experience, and their wisdom. Supporting our seniors and elders to remain living in their communities has the potential to enhance intergenerational relationships between our elders and the younger generations. Making it possible for seniors and elders to remain with their families for longer creates more opportunities for storytelling, sharing of traditional knowledge, and enrichment of culture and heritage. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to highlight that June 15th is World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. Raising public awareness about the abuse and neglect of seniors and elders is the first of many steps in preventing elder abuse. Abuse of older adults is more than just physical abuse. Elder abuse includes verbal, emotional, and financial abuse, and this problem is present within our communities. As part of the Continuing Care Services Action Plan, our government is committed to finalizing elder abuse screening tools in partnership with the NWT Senior Society. Together, our goal is to decrease the rate of elder abuse in the Northwest Territories by increasing awareness of elder abuse and ensuring that elders can access the supports that they need. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to further recognize the valuable work of the NWT Senior Society does in the prevention of abuse of older adults. The Society plays an important role in leading the government and non-government partners in this work through the NWT network to prevent the abuse of older adults. The NWT Senior Society are committed to educating and working with partners and other organizations to reduce, prevent, and ultimately eradicate the abuse of older adults. We are pleased to be working with them on these efforts. Our government is gathering data and collaborating with the NWT Senior Society to develop a report to provide information relating to programs and services used by seniors and elders in the Northwest Territories. By working together with our partners, our government is improving our programs and services to best support our seniors and elders, and we are creating a future where we can remain safely independent and actively engaged in their home communities for as long as possible. As the Minister responsible for seniors, I want to recognize all of the seniors and elders who help create the healthy and vibrant families and communities that we all want to be part of in the Northwest Territories. During Senior Citizens Month and Intergenerational Day and Elder Abuse Awareness Day, I encourage all residents to celebrate the important role that our seniors and our elders have in all of our lives. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Minister statement. Minister Ike Goodani, the Minister Industry, Tourism and Investment.
Mr. Speaker, with our people-centered approach to managing natural resources, the Northwest Territories does mining differently. Last night, Premier MacLeod, on behalf of the government, accepted the Diamonds Do Good Award from the Diamond Empowerment Fund and its Global Board of Directors in recognition of our leadership in Indigenous participation and social economic management in our mining industry. Mr. Speaker, our government is pleased to have our efforts to build and foster a socially conscious mining industry recognized. We call it the NWT difference. The Department of Industry, Tourism and Investment continues to work hard to set our territory apart as a jurisdiction where mining companies will want to work and invest. We want to make our territory a place that our partners can proudly say that their investments are helping to build and strengthen communities and contributing to a more prosperous future of the North. Mr. Speaker, the framework from our unique approach has been built on partnership with Indigenous and community governments, as well as our valued mining partners. Partnership and cooperation is a way of life in the North and ensures Indigenous and non-Indigenous people are able to decide on and implement shared priorities. Indigenous governments work with us to bring the varied and valued perspectives of their respective communities to the table through co-management boards. They contribute to the regulatory decision-making through the Intergovernmental Council and benefit from resource and revenue sharing agreements that have been put in place. Indigenous-owned businesses and development corporations have led the way in the growth and success of Northern service sector that now supports our mines and is providing jobs and training opportunities for NWT residents. In turn, our diamond mines have supported millions of dollars of community investments and legacy projects over the years to ensure communities will continue to benefit from mining long after their projects are gone. They have spent billions of dollars with Northern businesses, nearly half with Indigenous-owned companies, and employed thousands of NWT residents in well-paying jobs, helping many excel and advance their initial employment into transferable careers in mining and the trades. Mr. Speaker, these contributions deserve celebrating, and beginning tomorrow, we will do just that. As we do every year, our territory and government will celebrate the Northwest Territories Mining Week with free events in Yellowknife designed to get people of all ages engaged with geology, prospecting, and mining history. This year's Mining Week also marks the opening of our formal nomination process for the second annual Mining and Exploration, or MAX Awards, which we are pleased to sponsor and present in partnership with the Chamber of Mines. Interested parties are encouraged to nominate individuals and organizations in areas such as environmental and social responsibility, Indigenous achievements, and economic leadership. More information, including the nomination forms, can be found by visiting engage-iti.ca. Mr. Speaker, we are proud to support and celebrate the Northwest Territories mining sector. It is the largest contributor to our economy, and our government is committed to continuing our support and investment in the future of the responsible resource development so there continues to be jobs, business opportunities, and a strong economy to celebrate for years to come. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Minister statements. Minister statements. Member statements. Member for Yellowknife Centre.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you for tabling your discussion paper yesterday with the title Temporary Special Measures to Increase the Representation of Women in the NWT Legislative Assembly. I appreciate your leadership in finding a solution to this long-standing injustice. I have spoken often and at length about this issue, culminating in my motion on International Women's Day to set targets for increased representation. Mr. Speaker, the South Pacific island of Samoa is a democracy with roots the same as ours in Britain. Samoa started with the same problem of underrepresentation. After considerable debate, the government amended its constitution in 2013 to guarantee 5 of 49 seats to women. Mr. Speaker, the NWT legislature has set a target of doubling women's representation by 2023. That means 4 seats. All the work that goes into getting women to run and getting them elected will continue. Come the election, voters, let's say voters elected 3 women, 1 short of the goal. In that case, the Legislative Assembly would create 1 additional temporary seat for the 4-year term of that Assembly, and that seat would be occupied by a woman. Note, this is an additional seat, so that means the Legislative Assembly would then have 20 members. The next question is who would fill that seat? One way to answer that question is to look at candidates who earned the highest percentage of votes, but who were not elected. So in the last election, the former member for Hay River South earned the highest number of votes, but wasn't elected. In the 2011 election, it was Bertha Rabiskazo from your Montfrey riding. And in 2007, it was Denise Krasuski from Inuvik Twin Lakes. Another way to fill the extra seat is to award it on the basis of representation by population. The temporary in the title means just that. The seat or seats would be created for just 1 assembly. When the next election comes, if the women's representation goal is met, there would be no extra seats. If it's not met, there would be extra seats to meet the goal. Temporary special measures offer the possibility of a solution to the underrepresentation of women in this House. I believe that having more women here will encourage more women to run. And when women demonstrate their competence, initiative, and tenacity, voters will be more likely to elect them. Mr. Speaker, as we both know, it's time to take action on this issue, and I encourage members of this House and the public to read the paper outlining this option and to join the debate. Merci.
Massey. Member statement. Member Ike Goodine and the member of Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. As noted by our Minister for Seniors, today, June 1st, is Intergenerational Day. Among the many awareness days and events, this National Day is particularly important as a reminder of the power of making simple, respectful, intergenerational connections. It's the day where we should also consider how our actions today affect those that will come after us. Intergenerational Day Canada provides an easy opportunity to raise awareness of the many benefits of connections between generations. Stereotypes of both young and old people are broken down when they learn about each other. Intergenerational Day Canada makes a powerful statement about the value of connecting within each and everyone's community and neighborhood. There's another side to intergenerational respect and heritage, and that's what I'd like to focus on today. It's the need for this generation to ensure that we don't take away from opportunities for future generations and build a positive legacy from today's wealth to assure the financial stability and prospects for all those that will come after us. That's supposed to be the goal of the NWT Heritage Fund. Since its inception in 2012, the NWT Heritage Fund has grown to a very small amount of only $17.1 million. The fund is so neglected that the last annual report posted to the government website is for 2014, and the website link to the statute and regulations doesn't even work. That neglect seems to spread to the promised discussion paper to revitalize the Heritage Fund and its legislation. The intergenerational wisdom that prompted the creation of the Heritage Fund was sound, and we only have to look at other international examples to see the benefits of an aggressive wealth-building philosophy. Consider Norway, where per capita citizens hold the richest national wealth in the world, over $1 trillion, thanks to vigorous royalty policy for non-renewable resources and state ownership. Norway's standard of living has left Canada far behind. Our GNWT Heritage Fund website claims that, quote, by accumulating financial assets for the future, by which point resources may have been depleted, the NWT Heritage Fund will play an important role in preserving the benefits of resource development for future generations, end quote. Those words and the $17 million in the fund won't even make a small dent in the housing needs for our seniors. I'll have questions for the Minister of Finance on improving intergenerational equity of residents of the Northwest Territories. Massey, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Member statement. Member Ike Godana, the member Satu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is our last day of the spring session. The most controversial decisions was made by the members was Bill 6 to legalize cannabis. Making hard decisions, balanced decisions for the people we serve is one of the many challenges that come with this job. However, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to my summer on engaging discussions with my community residents, leaders on the many prosperous funding sources available to making meaningful family security supports. Most importantly, Mr. Speaker, I've witnessed the many hours and dedication of government and the staff on program and services delivery. Achieving success is being determined. And I put my speech down because I want to speak from the heart on what I've learned as a first-time MLA to this government. I've grown to see and respect my colleagues and the passion I've seen from all levels of this government, right from our Premier's position to the regular MLA side and to the staff on providing for the people in Northwest Territories and making a difference and going out there and securing the funding from all sources on what is given to us as well as what's available for us through aggression on applications from the federal level. I'm truly inspired by our Premier's sessional statement, the health initiatives by our department and the Minister and the staff, those differences of providing sound programming could be seen by the undertaking by the department, the new facility in Norman Wells, the new facility here in Stanton, and the renewed renovation plans for the old one, the new facility coming up in Hay River, the new facility coming up in Inuvik to provide long-term care through a new facility to our aging elders. Advancing forward to provide sound education to the people we serve through revisiting and reforming the Arctic College Foundation review. The housing programs.
Members, your time for member statement has expired.
Consent to conclude my statement. Mr. Speaker.
Member seeking unanimous consent to conclude his statement. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
Colleagues, Mr. Speaker, my last department address is Housing Corporation. I was inspired by the statement made by our minister yesterday. I've shared that with our leaders. There's a multiple source of programming here in our community, our government, as well as the federal government. One could say there's millions, billions just waiting to access for our community residents to deliver to the ones that we represent. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to working this summer on making a difference and taking advantage, most importantly, taking advantage of the resources available during the last term of this government, as well as the federal government. Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Member statement. Member Ike Godin and the member Yonge North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as noted, today is Intergenerational Day. That's a day when we remind ourselves of the importance of building connections between generations, connecting our elders and youth. Those connections in our communities make life richer for both younger and older people and support education, health, and our community wellness. But today marks another annual observation, Mr. Speaker. Today is also Power Rate Increase Day. That's a day when, for the past 7 years, the Public Utilities Board has approved the Power Corporation's annual application to increase power rates. The fees that all Northerners have no choice but to shell out to keep their homes heated and the lights on. It's been 7 years, Mr. Speaker, that we've been marking Power Rate Increase Day. In that time, this government has approved increases in the cost of power rates that have totaled nearly 40%. That's a cost, Mr. Speaker, that everyone has to pay. It's a cost that affects the price of everything, because like it or not, everything relies on power. We have no choice. That's a harder challenge for some than others. But many of our seniors don't have many options. Our elders have spent a lifetime working, building communities, raising families in the North. Now they deserve rest and reward. But as we know, many of them are on fixed incomes and rely on government support for basic needs. When we think of the cost of fuel, I wonder, has income assistance increased by 40% in 7 years? Has the seniors' fuel subsidy risen that much over the same time? Of course it hasn't. And so more and more of our seniors are actually having to go back into the workforce and subsidize their own income in order to live comfortably. Mr. Speaker, our mandate commits to the NWT residents, our commitments to the NWT residents include lowering the cost of living and creating secure communities for all generations. That commitment should especially focus on people who have limited means and can be the most vulnerable to changes in their living conditions, especially when it's been our doing that has impacted those living conditions. Our government has done well in the past few years to make sure its fiscal house is in order. We've done that through increased user fees, taxation, rate increases, etc. Now it's time to live up to our responsibility to make sure that our most vulnerable residents have the same chance to balance their books without being subject to additional costs or financial hardships. Mr. Speaker, folks don't need more government handouts. They need less fees, less taxes, and they need cheaper power. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Member statement. Member Ike Godin and the member Mackenzie Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today is Intergenerational Day. The work between our elders and youth is thriving in my riding, Mr. Speaker. Whether it's hunting, trapping, fishing, or language programs, both in the schools and on the land. Mr. Speaker, those teachings that our elders bring to our youth are thriving today. Mr. Speaker, I see it in the last few years. You know, our youth are out hunting and sharing what they've harvested with the communities. Also, we have dance groups in our communities that are teaching our youth our traditional ways. Mr. Speaker, and I just wanted to acknowledge that today, and please keep up the good work in the communities. Masicho.
Massey. Member statement. Member Ike Godin and the member Cam Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too would like to rise on the occasion of Power Rate Increase Day. Effective today, the Northwest Territories Power Corporation will increase electricity rates for its customers an average of 2%. That means residential customers using around 1,000 kilowatt hours per month in the winter will pay between $4 and $7.50 extra per month. And this is compounded with the 40% increase over 7 years of electricity rates in the Northwest Territories is increasingly making our cost of living untenable. There are some things that there's only so much we can do being Northerners and having to struggle or having to accept the reality that some things will be more expensive here, but power doesn't necessarily have to be one of them. I firmly believe that the NWT has such tremendous hydroelectric potential that we could be a net exporter of hydroelectricity at some point in the near future. But to get there, we need a transformative plan and a real vision to expand our hydroelectric system and make connections with the South. This is the only real way, I believe, that we can effectively reduce our power rates. The current system is unsustainable. We're always going to see more and more increases year on year, and more people struggling to pay. And that increases the costs to government, it increases the costs to our social programs, and it increases the costs to the average household, the average Northerner. And I do see the government's taking the Towson hydro expansion seriously. But I have to question how seriously when they're committing their energy strategy and their climate change strategy to this Towson project, in that 44% of their greenhouse gas reductions depend on the completion of this project, and yet we have received no federal funding. So if we're going to meet our commitments to climate change, if we're going to once and for all reduce the cost of living, we need to back this project, and we need to make it a top priority with the time we have left in this Assembly, and make sure we have the strongest case possible to finally put an end to the endless increases of electricity rates in the Northwest Territories and make a real difference for our residents. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Member statement. Member Ike Godani, the member Tuna de Wolade.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in all my years in the public service, I have worked hard to increase the number of Priority 1 Indigenous candidates that we hire in the GNWT. Mr. Speaker, I've worked as president of the NWT Housing Corporation and later became Associate Deputy Minister of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. In both instances, I worked to increase the number of Priority 1 and long-term NWT residents who are Priority 2 public servants. I'm very thankful that the Department of Environment and Natural Resources has maintained a high priority numbers, around 45%. Mr. Speaker, when I was Minister of Human Resources, it was like pulling teeth to have the departments develop a 5 to 10-year human resource plan. Indigenous people born and raised in NWT feel that they do not receive the same consideration as others for government jobs. Mr. Speaker, apprenticeship jobs would be ideal for Indigenous people that plan to remain in the NWT and pay their taxes instead of relying on income support and short-term jobs to meet ends meet. They too need an opportunity to become productive members of society. Mr. Speaker, I have many friends in NWT, and we have seen the GNWT slide non-priority people into the public service employment with ease, while Priority 1 candidates are busy jumping through hoops and running into obstacles. Mr. Speaker, when most people retire from the GNWT, they know that they have spent their last day on the job, but when some senior managers retire, they are put on contract and they will be making just as much, if not more money before retirement. Meanwhile, they tie up salary dollars that could be used to hire some Northerners. Mr. Speaker, I've been fighting for Priority 1 candidates in this government, and without support from the highest level and without a human resource plan to actively work on increasing Priority 1 candidates, we will remain the same, and half of our citizens will continue to live in a territory where the public service is not representative of the population they serve. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Member statement. Member Ike Godani, the member Nehende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, about a month ago, I was informed about upcoming reductions to the school support staff for the next year in the Hendy riding. Mr. Speaker, we are seeing an increase in the number of students who have complex needs. According to the information provided to me, we are above average compared to other regions. Unfortunately, the resources that the DDEC receives from the department does not recognize this fact. This is a huge concern for parents, DEA members, students, and myself. In the Detroit region proper, we have 9 schools spread over 8 communities. Some of our schools have small student population. This provides the DDEC with challenges to provide the support other regions enjoy. When you look at the requirements, we need a teacher, language specialist, and/or a classroom assistant. To the department's credit, we've seen a program support teacher in each community. Unfortunately, this becomes unrealistic for our smaller communities.
The DDEC has come up with a plan to combine a number of half-time positions into a traveling position for some of the smaller communities. This is a good step. However, this means each of the smaller communities only gets serviced once a week per month. This year, we are seeing a reduction to the DEC. This means that the support staff in schools are being cut or reduced to part-time. I personally disagree with these cuts. These cuts will have a huge impact on wellness of the staff and students. In some of the smaller communities, we're putting the teachers in an unsafe environment. Part of the day, we'll see teachers being the only adult in the school with students. Safety being a concern, what happens when a student gets hurt? What about the other students? Without a proper support staff in place, the teachers end up supervising the students during the breaks all the time. We could see teachers spending more time managing their class instead of teaching. Mr. Speaker, the formula looks at a number of students in the region instead of the school's population individually. This ends up affecting the larger schools. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy the department has recognized the importance to pay the teachers at the level that they are on the pay grid. Unfortunately, it's not the same for superintendents, finance, and administrative staff who are GNW personnel. They are paid at a midpoint, but that doesn't take into account that staff are long-term. Because of this, the DDEC has to come up with the difference. This means cuts to other staffs and programs. Due to this fact in student enrollment, the divisional office has seen a reduction of staff from 14 to 18 staff in 2007. These are our support system for teachers and students. They do a great job.
Member Nahende, your time for member statement has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unanimous consent to conclude my statement.
Massey. Member seeking unanimous consent to conclude his statement. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the department needs to look at the Detroit Divisional Education Council funding allotment, and we are looking and how we are looking after the NWT's most important resource, our youth. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll have questions for the minister later on today.
Massey. Member statement. Member Ike Godin and the member Hay River North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the upcoming legalization of cannabis has sparked a lot of discussion about addictions and addictions treatment. That's not surprising given our staggering rates of substance abuse in the NWT and the fact that many of us either see or feel the effects of addictions on a regular basis. However, we must recognize that while addictions is a problem, it's also a symptom of an underlying issue. If an individual feels a need to escape reality through drugs or alcohol on such a regular basis that he or she develops an addiction, there's a reason behind that need. There's something else driving that need. Unfortunately, those driving forces, the mental health issues that lead to addiction, are often hidden. However, the impacts of mental health issues can be very real. Addictions is just one potential outcome. Suicide is another, as many Northerners know all too well. Even when the impacts are not this extreme, they can still be debilitating, life-altering, and affect people's emotional, physical, and economic well-being. Mental health issues can prevent people from holding a job, from maintaining adequate housing, and from having healthy relationships. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to think that this isn't news to people. I'd like to think that everyone here is well aware of these facts. However, the mental health supports available to the people of the NWT, and Hay River in particular, make me think otherwise. The government often pays lip service to mental health issues and produces many frameworks, strategies, and action plans with the best of intentions. But since I've been in office, I've seen little come from these efforts in terms of what's happening on the ground in Hay River. The waitlist for community counseling in Hay River is still months long. They simply don't have the resources to keep up with the demand, meaning that many of the people who need treatment never end up receiving it. So what happens to those people? Many trudge on and make it through each day, suffering quietly. Others may see their symptoms worsen and develop into a substance abuse problem, at which point the GNWT will step in to help. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to see this government become more proactive and less reactive, so they're not forced to react to situations that could have been avoided in the first place. I'd like to see this government pay the same heed to the state of our human infrastructure as it does to our capital infrastructure. I'll have questions for the Minister of Health at the appropriate time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Member statement. Member Ike Godin and the member Nanakput.
Q90, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to acknowledge the high school graduating class from my riding in Nunavut. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to have the 2018 graduating class from my hometown of Paulatuk and the communities of Tuktoyaktuk, Sax Harbor, and Uluhuktuk. I would also like, Mr. Speaker, I would like to congratulate the following 2018 graduates Jasmine Kiogak from Sachs Harbor, who's attending East 3 Secondary School in Inuvik, Mac Chloe, Jacob Klinkenberg, and Nadine Kunulik from Helen Kelbeck School in Uluhukta, Jerry Reuben Bennett, Heather Thrasher, Kiara Rubin, and Curtis Kregnichuk from Engek School in Politek, Alyssa Felix, Alicia Lute, Brianna Wolke, Marcus Kimmick-Sana, Braden Teddy, Lucas Emahawk Felix from Mangalalek School in Tuktoyaktuk. Mr. Speaker, our youth have the potential to transform their lives and their communities for the better. It is my wish that they succeed in all the things that they set out to do. Mr. Speaker, the North has many youth who are very gifted and intelligent. It is my hope that they discover and hone their unique talents and ways and to always believe in themselves and their abilities, whatever path they decide to take. Mr. Speaker, I wish for them to never give up on their dreams, no matter how hard things seem. Pick yourselves up and finish good. Mr. Speaker, we must give our youth the tools they need to succeed, as they'll be the next generation of leadership in the Northwest Territories and around the globe. Colleagues, please join me in celebrating the 2018 graduating class of Nunavut region across the Northwest Territories. P90, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Member statement. Member Ike Godin and Member Decho.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in this side I saw then ke Gutlin Day, not day, idin de gonito land leases ke hutli guli agucha. Mr. Speaker, for example, the minimum annual lease rate increased to $840 in both territorial and commissioners' lands, up from $150 to $600, was 560% and 40% respectively. Mr. Speaker, during the February-March session, discussions in this House also centered on issues of land tenure, with the Department of Lands creating several positions to address equity leases. My colleagues and I raised a number of concerns regarding both the sticker shock of a significant lease rate increases as well as the location of positions to address land tenure issues. Mr. Speaker, the choji dene cannot de que anagin
people it's hard for the people to live on their land with the leases are so expensive. It's hard for them to pay it, and it's expensive. And land leases, it's hard for them. They're so constituent. It's hard for them to pay for. So the Minister of Land, if when this time comes, then I'll ask the Minister of Lands.
Member statements. Member for Inuvik, Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think it's important that as an assembly we acknowledge our young people and their achievements across Northwest Territories. We've heard a couple of members talk about graduations that are going on across the NWT. Today I'd like to speak to a young lady that was at the Canada-wide Science Fair in May, and she won a bronze medal. Her name's Tyra Cockney-Goo. She actually served as a page in this assembly a couple of years ago. And her project was sleep deprivation, and she actually experimented on herself, and the results she found in the project she put forward was that because she was a high school student, she stayed up late and was studying, and she likes to procrastinate, so that caused her to lose some sleep, and so I thought that was a very good study that she did. And I'd also like to acknowledge Caitlin Harder, who's a grade 9 student in Inuvik. She was also at the science fair I'm not sure where it was held, but she was also at the science fair, and she won a scholarship for a month-long science camp this summer. And speaking of the achievements of young people, tomorrow in Inuvik, East 3 Secondary School will be having their graduation. So members have spoken to it in this assembly. I mean, we all want to acknowledge the accomplishments of our young people. So I would ask the assembly to join me in congratulating Tyra and Caitlin and all the other young students across Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Member statements. Member statements. Returns to oral questions. Returns to oral questions. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Member for Grey Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to welcome Mr. John Soderberg to the House today. Mr. Soderberg is a Board of Director representing the NWT Senior Society and a resident of the Great Slave riding. I'd like to thank John for his service, and I appreciate the hard work that the Society does on behalf of seniors and elders throughout the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Recognition of visitors in gallery. Member for Nanakput.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to, I saw my friend Arlene Haché in the gallery, so I'd like to welcome her as well. To my wife Yvonne, who's been sitting in here yesterday listening to the debate on Bill 6, and it's good to see the interaction and especially hearing about it later on at home. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Welcome, Yvonne. Thank you.
Massey. Recognition of visitors in gallery. Member for Range Lake.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Sorry, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to recognize Range Lake constituent David Wazelku. I'll keep trying. And also Ms. Arlene Haché, who's the Yellowknife representative for the Northwest Territories Status Women Council. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Recognition of visitors in gallery. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to recognize my constituency assistant, Mr. Garrett Cochran, who is in the gallery today. He's been helping me behind the scenes to be prepared for this sitting, and I couldn't do it without him. Thank you very much, Garrett.
Massey. Recognition of visitors in gallery. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I too want to recognize Yellowknife North constituent Arlene Haché. Arlene is a well-known community builder and advocate for social change. Just want to say welcome to the House. Thank you for being here. Thank you.
Massey. Recognition of visitors in gallery. Member for South 2.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too would like to recognize Ms. Yvonne Nakamayak, originally from Norman Wells, and also Sarah Cleary, providing Slavey language interpretation. Massey.
Massey. Recognition of visitors in gallery. Recognition of visitors in gallery. If we miss anyone in the gallery, thanks for being here with us. It's always nice to have an audience as part of our proceedings. Massey. Acknowledgements. Member for Nahende.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, after 31 years of teaching and serving the students of the Nahende and Detroit region, I'm sad and happy at the same time to announce that after this school year, Terry Jaffrey will be retiring. Terry worked at the Echo Denny School, Thomas Simpson Secondary, and Wampus Elementary Schools, and at Detroit Divisional Education Council. Terry was inducted into the 2007 Education Hall of Fame and received the NWT Superintendents Association Leadership Award. Terry said she will miss being around people all the day and working with the trustees at the council meetings. Thank you, Terry, for your hard work and dedication. I wish you the best in your retirement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Acknowledgements. Acknowledgements. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions are for the Minister of Health and Social Services. On this intergenerational day, I'd like to see him put some words into action about seniors. So in February, I asked the Minister about the status of contracting a new provider for the Adult Day program in Yellowknife. The Minister said, and I quote, "I'm hoping that we can get this contract out as quickly as possible, hopefully before the end of this fiscal year," end quote. Can the Minister provide us with an update? Thank you.
Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as the member knows, we did go out for an RFP. We did not have any interest in that RFP. In discussion with the member during the last sitting, I indicated that we're going to reach out to some of the people who requested the proposal to find out why there was no interest in the proposal and what we could do differently before we go out with a new proposal that might actually garner some interest. We did that work. We did hear from some proponents that, first off, the length of duration of the RFP was too short. They felt it needed to be out longer so they could put together a better package. There was concerns about some of the other smaller clauses within the RFP, and there was a larger concern about the actual duration of the contract. So we have made those amendments to the RFP. We're just doing the final tweaks as we speak, and we're hoping to have that RFP issued this month so that we can find a new provider of the Adult to Day program here in Yellowknife as quickly as possible. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Nakeda, Council Member, Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure I understand all of the minister's answers, so I would like him to clarify that the RFP is available as a thing to bid on for longer, and the term of the contract is available for longer, and has the money increased as well? Those are my questions, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Service.
Mr. Speaker, the RFP is going to be issued this month. We're going to run the RFP for a longer period of time, which hopefully allows people to develop more comprehensive proposals and have more time to assess their capacity to actually bid on the proposal. We have, based on recommendations from individuals who did request a previous proposal, are extending the length of the contract, so that will make it more appealing, hopefully, according to some of the proponents. We haven't issued the RFP. I've said we're going to issue the RFP this month, and hopefully we'll see some solid proposals. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Masi. Oral question, Tadade, Council Member, Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate that clarification. I'm wondering if the minister is going to go beyond, hopefully, and actually meet with people to ask them to bid on this contract. For example, there's been lots of discussion about how seniors and children in daycare can form a great partnership because they need, in some cases, similar services in the similar situation. So is there any kind of proactive work going on to attract bidders in that way? Thank you.
Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, after the member's previous comments in the House when we discussed the RFP that was unsuccessful, I indicated that we would be reaching out to individuals to get their thoughts on how we could be more creative. A lot of that work has already been done. Once the RFP has been issued, I'm happy to have the department mail that copy of the RFP to anybody that's interested and have conversations with anybody who has some creative ideas on how to move forward in a cooperative way in order to provide quality day programs for seniors in the Yellowknife area. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Nodere, Council Member, Yellowknife Centre.
Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the minister's response. Is it possible for the minister or his staff to be even more proactive than advertising and mailing the package out? Is it possible for him or his staff to actively encourage people to apply so that we ensure that this time there are bidders on this proposal? Thank you.
Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the department will be reaching out to potential proponents like we did previously to encourage them to apply and discuss with them options as we move forward. And I'll certainly, get the information out as best I can through tweets and other medium to encourage people to apply. Mr. Speaker, I want the same thing the member wants. I want a day program in Yellowknife. We're going to do everything that we can. If we're unsuccessful with the RFP, I'll certainly be sitting down with the member and other Yellowknife MLAs to discuss other possibilities. We're very hopeful that we'll find someone who's interested in providing this important service, and we'll continue to work until it happens. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Masi. Oral question, the member Nahende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you heard today about some cuts that are potentially happening in the Decho proper area and that, and in regards to the formula. So my first question to Minister of Education, Culture and Employment is, how is the formula developed to provide support for teachers and students in this regard? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Masi. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So school funding is mostly funded under a formula based on number of children in the schools. They did do some work on the inclusive schooling funding in 2016. That work was had input from research professionals from the different regions, also nationally recognized experts, both nationally and northern. So they are incremental in providing guidance to the Department of Education, Culture and Employment on the renewal and the review of the formulas that were currently there. So currently it is based mostly on numbers of youth, though. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question la Canada, Council Member Nahende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for that answer. However, when I go down south and the special needs or not special needs, students with complex needs, we see a different way of doing things. So why doesn't this government base its formula on the needs instead of just the formula of a students' population? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hey. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Needs-based formula actually was one of the questions that I was interested in as well when I took over this portfolio, but the explanation that I received made sense. So there's a couple of problems. In the southern communities, actually, there are more resources available to them because the funding, of course, is based on per capita for federal funding, and the number of people actually brings in more money as well. Within the Northwest Territories, we have another issue. So it's not only about number of people, it's the bigger issue is that we don't have the access to the amount of resources. If we based it on needs-based only, we would have to have the children diagnosed, and we don't have the resources at this point to be able to diagnose all of the children in the Northwest Territories. Not only do we not have that resource, is that a lot of children don't show some of the symptoms of developmental delays early on, and so those are things sometimes that appear later on. But I should say also that many of the jurisdictions in the south that actually are needs-based are finding difficulty with that formula as well, and so they're moving into a formula that they're looking at more classrooms broadly funding instead of the strictly individual needs. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Tarada, Council Member Nahende.
Speaker, and I thank the Minister for that answer. I know in my riding, we are based on diagnosed. They have been identified. We have 7 that I know of with autistics. You know, they've been autistic, been identified that. Parents are going out to schools and that. So, or going down south to get educated, because right now we as a government are not dealing with that. So I guess my next question to the Minister is, how do you track how many students have student support programs in place in the date show? And is it above average compared to other regions? Because that's what I'm hearing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, there is some evidence that says that we do have more difficulties within some of the smaller schools. The date show is one of the areas that was identified as higher than an average population base. I should say, though, that yes, some of the children would be diagnosed, people that have autistic issues or things, but some other issues are not easy to diagnose, such as FASD, which sometimes the symptoms show many years later. So the inclusive funding isn't only based on the children that have been diagnosed, it's based on the general population formula, which in my opinion, I think is a more equitable formula at this point, until we can have more resources that every child can be diagnosed at early intervention. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Nundere Council Member Nahende.
Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for that answer. It disappoints me. We talk about our youth being our future, that's our resource, and this department is, well, we don't have the resources, so we got to do a formula. There's a need. There is a need. We have people diagnosed here. So will the Minister look into this further so we can come up with the right resources for our people? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And our youth, and I'm talking about our youth. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
So, Mr. Speaker, I want to clarify again that the reason that it's not needs-based is because we don't have the resources to diagnose every child, and so we provide the inclusive funding formula is based on the number of children in all schools, so that children that do not have the ability to be diagnosed or aren't showing the symptoms yet to bring into the diagnosis are still accessing funding. But I do want to say that we are seeing large difficulties within small communities, and so we need to look at small communities in itself to see how we can actually support them better. So maybe the funding formula that is based on number of children is not adequate for small communities where they don't have as many resources, but I don't think it should be needs-based. It should be probably community-based versus needs-based. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Canada, the member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. My questions are for the Deputy Premier. I'd like to follow up on the motion passed unanimously in this House on October the 20th, 2017, calling on our government to take action to protect the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge and the Porcupine Caribou herd. That motion directed the Premier to write the Prime Minister of Canada on these matters. I'm wondering whether that letter was sent, whether there was a reply, and can he give that correspondence to us and table it in the House? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the letter was sent as a result of that motion. The letter was sent on December the 19th to the Prime Minister from our Premier. I'm not sure of a response yet. I will follow up on that, and at the appropriate time, I'm confident that the Premier will table those letters. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Canada, member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I'd like to thank the Deputy Premier for that, and if he could provide the correspondence in advance of tabling, that'd be really helpful. But on April 20th, the United States Bureau of Land Management opened a public comment period on oil and gas exploration in the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge, and the deadline is June the 19th for that. So can the Deputy Premier tell us whether GNWT will be making a written submission to the Bureau of Land Management on this matter, and what that submission might look like? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are currently preparing a technical submission to the Environmental Impact Statement scoping process, which I will submit as Minister of ENR before the deadline of June 19th. I'm not exactly quite sure the contents of the technical submission, but I can follow up on that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Deputy Premier again for that. I'd like to encourage him to publicly release that submission here in the Northwest Territories. So the October 2017 motion on protecting the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge called on our government to support and assist Gwich'in and other governments in their efforts. Can the Deputy Premier describe what efforts GNWT has made to support and assist other governments protecting the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge, which is, of course, the calving grounds for the porcupine caribou herd? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, GNWT has been one of the parties to the Porcupine Caribou Management Agreement. We've been working very closely with our counterparts in the Yukon and the Gwich'in. The Yukon actually hosted a Porcupine Caribou Summit of the parties in January 31st, 2018. As Minister of ENR, I hosted a follow-up to the Porcupine Caribou Summit in Nunavik on April 6th and 7th. And based on these meetings, a technical workshop was held in Whitehorse in May to coordinate a science assessment of the potential impacts of development on the Porcupine Caribou calving grounds. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, member Frame Lake.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. Sorry, I couldn't see the light there. I want to thank the minister, or the Deputy Premier, for that response. It sounds like our government is actually following through on that, and that's a great thing. But while we're on the subject of protecting caribou calving grounds, does our government actually have a policy position on resource development in other caribou calving grounds, and what are we doing to protect them? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was waiting for that. Well, this is a herd that's extremely important to the people in the Western Arctic and Yukon and in Alaska. When we do our work on some of our own projects, I mean, all the best science will go into it, and we'll obviously take the preservation of any species into consideration. The issue that we're facing with here is with the porcupine caribou management, porcupine caribou herd. We're dealing with an administration in Washington that will open up to the Wild West without much thought given to the preservation of the caribou herd. So this is a very passionate issue for the people of the Western Arctic and the Yukon and in Alberta. And for a lot of these people, it's a hill that they will die on. So it's something that's very important to them. And as far as our policy on, I mean, we'll do all our scientific work when we have projects, and some of that work that we do will go into the decision-making process. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, the member Tuna de Willade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I made a member statement on a public service and going through the annual report. I have questions for the Minister of Finance. I'd like to ask the Minister if the ministers, all of the ministers, have looked at the priority 1 numbers in the various departments. Thank you.
Merci. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have priority 1, our priority with the government in Northwest Territories, and we follow those numbers very closely. And as you are able to see in the report that we released a little while ago, I believe that our priority 1 candidates were quite high, and actually the priority 1 women candidates were a lot higher than the men. So we're aware of those numbers, and we continue to monitor them. We are developing a GNWT-wide resource plan with departmental implementation plans as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, member Tuna de Willade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Party 1 candidates have hardly increased for 10 years. I'd like to ask the Minister if anything is being done actively being done to increase the number of priority 1 candidates in the GNWT. Thank you.
Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, as I said, we are developing a GNWT-wide human resource plan with departmental implementation plans. We expect that work to be done over the summer. And as far as trying to increase the numbers, I mean, obviously we want to see those numbers go up, and I've always been a firm believer that based on merit, those numbers will go up. I think Member and I, both from an era where it was harder for P1 candidates to get into the government system, and I think over the years, maybe the numbers have gone up much in the last 10 years, but I think the numbers are quite high, and I think they're continuing to improve. They will continue to improve. And as we see our younger people graduating, going off to university, getting the knowledge from there and bringing it back and working in the communities, I think we'll see those numbers continue to rise. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, member Tuna de Willade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think part of the increasing numbers is at the graduation level is to give their parents jobs. Mr. Speaker, can the Minister tell me if direction was given specifically department by department on the development of human resource plans? Thank you.
Merci. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I said, we are working on a GNWT-wide plan. As far as specific directions given to each individual department, I'd have to follow up with the Department of HR. But the government knows, and we're also, we also recognize the fact that we want to see more P1 candidates, and we're starting to see a lot of P1 candidates that are moving into positions because based on the merit and what they bring to the job. So, but we'll continue to work on that. I had the opportunity just a couple of months ago to take part in a workshop that was actually being sponsored by ENR, and it was an Indigenous woman workshop. That what they did was they brought in a lot of Indigenous females from across Northwest Territories that work within ENR, and I spoke at that, and the first thing I said, I was excited about all the potential I see in this room, and and we'll see a lot of those girls that were there moving through the system based on what they bring to the position. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, no dere Council Member Trinity Willoughby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly not what I'm seeing in the GNWT, and I've been around for over 40 years. Mr. Speaker, in the GNWT, not just been around, period. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the Minister if the department is developing a plan that the departments are working on, a plan that advances Indigenous people in the GNWT. I found the most effective method was to have managers and directors that were from the Northwest Territories, whether they be priority one or priority candidates, and they seem to be able to attract and retain people from the Northwest Territories to work in the public service. I'd like to ask if there is an actual plan to developing Indigenous employees for advancement in the GNWT. Thank you.
Merci. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's a couple of programs that there's called a new Gateway program is being rolled out to support more training positions within the GNWT, regional recruitment program to provide opportunities for residents not quite meeting job requirements to develop into positions, while we have our summer students that we hire every year, and about 58% of those are Indigenous. To change the intern program so we could end up doubling the number of interns so Northern students have the opportunities to gain experience and hopefully become permanent employees. Indigenous management program is being revised to better support more Indigenous people to move into management positions. So there are a number of initiatives on the go. And as we prepare for our fall session, I would be more than pleased to have the department put a briefing together that we can provide to committee and answer any questions they may have. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, the member Kamlik.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm very concerned about the ongoing power increases that are affecting my constituents, and I see the Telston Hydro expansion as a potential for resolving this situation as a transformative piece of infrastructure. But I would like to ask the Minister of Infrastructure what his vision for hydroelectricity is in the Northwest Territories. Is this just something we'd like to have, or is this something we are going to have and put the resources behind it to make it a reality? Thank you.
Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Based on some of the member statements today, I would gladly answer this question. Hydro generation is definitely the future of the Northwest Territories. It has to be. We have to meet our greenhouse gas emissions, our commitments to the Pan-Canadian framework, our international commitments. And one of the only ways we're going to be able to do that in the Northwest Territories is through the expansion of hydro projects. We have renewables coming. We have our bilaterals that we've signed with the federal government to help us move forward our other energy initiatives under our 2030 plan around windmills, LNG expansion, transmission line expansion, solar expansion. But some of these are costly. We're in remote communities. We're spread out of vast, large territory. But the expansion of the Tolson project will help us displace diesel generation in our territory. It's going to help us bring in revenues that we can use to offset the high cost of living in some of these other communities and do projects that we want to do up there as new technology expands. and we will continue to work with the federal government to secure funding to expand the Tolson project. But at the same time, as we've talked in this House lately about around the money that we're going to use initially, we want to be able to find a potential market, figure out our capital costs, figure out the transmission line routing, and finalize our business case going forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, la Canada, Council Member Kamlik.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I don't often agree with the minister, but in this case I do. To ensure that we have buy-in from all of our residents, is the minister going to be consulting with impacted Indigenous nations on the hydro expansion so we don't get it held up in the regulatory process when it needs to move along? Thank you.
Merci. Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been asked this question previously in the House by the member from Tunaday-Welladay, and I've committed that I will be reaching out to all the affected groups that want to partner with us on this project and have discussions around the expansion of the Tolson, and we will be wanting to be doing that sooner than later. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Tada, Council Member Kamlik.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the minister for that commitment. I want to know if he's going to reach out to private sector as well. We have relied on P3 projects for many of our major infrastructure. Many years ago, there was a proposal from ATCO to do this work of connecting the grid north to south. Is the minister going to reach out to ATCO or to other private sector power providers to make use of their capital to get this project off the ground sooner? Thank you.
Merci. Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've said, with this initial funding, we want to find out the potential market, our capital costs, our transmission line routing, and this stuff, and we finalize our business case. This is a large transformational type of project. It's going to take a lot of partners to do this, not just us and along with Aboriginal governments. We're going to need assistance from the private sector, maybe investment from the private sector to help us accomplish this. And I've had discussions myself personally with a lot of individual electrical companies that want to have an opportunity to be able to participate in projects in Northwest Territories, not just the Tolson, but also transmission lines possibly, or our community power generation that we're looking at adding in our energy strategy. So we are open to talking to anybody how we can move some of these projects forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Nundere, Council Member Kamlik.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And has the minister reached out to our neighbouring provinces as well, talked to the provincial governments about offsetting their greenhouse gas emissions with a potential hydro expansion here? So it's not just us, but we can make this a nation-building project. Thank you.
Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, we have reached out to Saskatchewan and Alberta. We've had initial discussions with them. They are ongoing to look at the possibility of doing this. But as I've said, with the money that we've allocated towards the budget going forward here and be able to build our business case, we will continue to have those conversations with them as all provinces and territories look how they're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions across this country. A number of provinces are trying to get off of coal, and I think we're in a position where we can help them. It's just as long as the business case makes sense. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Canada, the member Decho.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions are to the Minister of Lands. Recently, we had a tour of the Decho, and the Minister of Lands accompanied me on a tour of the Decho riding, and he's heard many concerns. And one of the concerns regards land leases. As we all might know, currently there's negotiations between the Decho First Nations and the government of the Northwest Territories and the federal government. First Nations assert title to their traditional lands, and of course governments, their approach is to try to maintain the public interest of all residents of the NWT. Now with land leases, the way that I explained it in my language is that it's board land. That's what we're living on in most communities, and we have to pay government for living on those lands. So such is a predicament that we all live in here in the NWT, as opposed to outright ownership of lands, where a person could buy a house and put that house on a piece of land. So my question is to the Minister of Lands. Can the Minister outline the barriers for making residential leases available in the Decho? Merci.
Merci. Minister of Lands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, residents can apply for a lease at any time. There's a process which is followed, and the department will work with the community to ensure the application is in accordance with development plan. So we invite people who are interested in acquiring residential leases to contact the department for information on the application process or for assistance in making their application. Thank you.
Merci. Oral question, the Kirare, Council Member Decho.
Speaker, the process is very clear. Has the Department of Lands received feedback from leaseholders on the fee changes, and what is the Minister doing to address those concerns? Merci.
Minister of Lands.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have received feedback on the increases. I'd have to say that the support for the increases was not universal. However, we still do feel they are fair because we wanted to bring the two land regimes, if I could put it that way, into alignment. And it's also important to remember, and I was surprised to find this, that there were quite a few territorial leases within the community. So there were quite a few residential leases on territorial lands in communities. So it's particularly important in my submission that there be alignment between the two amounts that are paid on leases. Yes, particularly with those on territorial lands, there was a significant increase, and no, not everybody was happy. Thank you.
Question, Tarare, Council Member Decho.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, can the Minister provide an update on whether the land specialist positions have been filled and whether work on equity leases has started? Merci.
Merci. Minister of Lands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, we are working on this important project. Office space has been identified, and I understand that the staffing process will be underway this month. Members will recall that initially there were to be 3 positions, and we increased the number to 5, as this is a particularly important matter that we all wish to resolve. Thank you.
Merci. Oral question, Nundere, Council Member Decho.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my last question is solutions. I know the Department of Lands is reviewing the matter of land leases, and possibly maybe the minister could commit the idea of looking at land designation for First Nations, so that they still could retain some measure of at least being First Nations within Canada. At the same time, meeting the needs and interests of people that want to have land for residential purposes. Would the minister commit to perhaps considering the idea of a different and unique land designation for the NWT? Merci.
Merci. Minister of Lands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is a very complex question, and I'm not sure of all the ramifications. I would have to discuss that with my fellow cabinet ministers. I'd certainly be prepared to have further conversations with the member opposite, or if he wants to put this suggestion, which I'm not sure I fully understand, into writing, we could at least consider it. Thank you.
Merci. Oral question, Canada Member Yonge North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, earlier today I talked about the cost of living, in particular as it related to seniors. My questions today are for the Minister of Finance. Recent years, we've seen various fees that have increased. I'd like to ask the Minister, is the government's fiscal strategy to save $150 million over the life of this Assembly still in place? Is it still a thing? Is it still underway? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that has actually went so well, we've decided to double it No, Mr. Speaker, when we came into the 18th Legislative Assembly, we had a goal of $150 million. Because of a lot of back and forth between ourselves and committee and listening to what the public had to say, we were able to come up with just over, I believe, $100 million. And as tough as decision that was, I think it's actually positioned us very well to invest into some of the infrastructure projects and match some of the Canadian or money from Canada, our 25 cents on the dollar. And I think the commitment I made at the time was that this was something that we were going to do over the first 2 years of this assembly. So I believe I've met that commitment, and the anticipation is we're not looking at making any more reductions, although there will be some residual reductions based on the decisions that were made in years 1 and 2. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Oral question, Akira Cassie, member Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it is Friday, so I guess it could be considered joke day today as well. But I appreciate the minister's reply. But the minister just indicated that this was a 2-year undertaking, and so I guess the next question is, there's been various fees and taxes that have had significant impact on the cost of living recently, and so I guess when can residents see these increases halted, the government ones, the ones that I'm talking about? The 2-year plan is done. Are these fees and these ongoing increases, is that it? Can we see a reprieve now, or are they going to be halted? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Minister of Finance.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, member's right. There was some increases as a result of some of the exercises that we went through, and some of those had to be made. They hadn't been increased for a long time. Some fees are legislated that are reviewed every 5 years, so those are going to happen regardless. But we tried to keep the effects to the people of the Northwest Territories to a minimum, and that's what we'll continue to try to do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Tadare Cassie, member Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I appreciate the reply. It's good that we can try to make the effort to reduce these fees. I do want to remind the government that while they're making sure that their revenues are up, it is on having a major effect on the cost of living of our northern residents. So we need to be mindful of that. So I guess then the big question that's still outstanding is there was lots of talk in the last session about a land transfer tax, and there's still some uncertainty around that. And simply, Northerners want to know, is it coming? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, member's absolutely correct. This was an initiative that was brought forward by the Department of Justice to, as part of their contribution to the exercise we went through. There has been some opposition to this, not only from regular members, but from members of the public. So I don't think we've landed on a decision on this yet. We'll continue to have that conversation. I have informed the department that if they want to try pull this one on the table, they'll have to put something else on the table to meet their contribution to the exercise that we went through. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Oral question, Nundire Cassie, member Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, then I guess the question of whether there's future fees to be expected has not ended. I mean, it seems to me that if we're going to potentially take the land transfer tax one off the table, that would be welcomed, but that there's a directive in place apparently to make sure that it's going to be made up somewhere else. Is that actually the case, or can people expect in the future here to see continued tax increases or fee increases of some kind to help the government meet their fiscal strategy? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, member did mention that this was Friday, and but we're working with the department to see what we can do. Of course, we have to listen to some of the concerns that were raised by regular members and some concerns That we do that all the time, and you know that.
That's right.
And
That's right.
and concerns that were raised by members of the public. So we take that into consideration. Like I said, we haven't landed on a final decision yet. Of course, we will keep committee apprised as to our discussions. We're continuing to have discussions internally. And as far as the other member spoke about the fiscal situation, I believe the decisions that we've made, although as tough as some of them may have been, has put us in a position. We had to absorb a couple of hits, obviously, with the first year with the $34 million reduction in the money from the federal government. Then last year with the money in the corporate taxes, the contribution gone down. So I think we've positioned ourselves well to absorb those, as well as make our 25% contribution to a lot of infrastructure projects. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Hikere Canyon, the member Hay River North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have questions for the Minister of Health. Earlier, I mentioned the challenges faced by residents of Hay River who want to access mental health care. Long waits and difficulty booking appointments at the medical clinic is a common topic of discussion in Hay River. However, difficulty accessing mental health care in Hay River is not something people talk about as openly because there's still a stigma surrounding it. However, I assure you that accessing treatment is a problem in Hay River and a serious one. And I brought it up in this House before, I brought it up in committee, and I brought it up directly to the Minister of Health. In 2016, the Department of Health released the Mental Health Care Action Plan, followed by the Mental Health Strategic Framework, followed by the Child and Youth Mental Wellness Action Plan. As a result of these initiatives, I'd like to ask the Minister, how has the GNWT improved access to mental health services and the services themselves in Hay River? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Department, the Authority, the Territorial Authority, as well as the Hay River Health and Social Services Authority has been listening to the member as well as to the residents of Hay River. I've got confirmation that Hay River Health and Social Services continues to strive to improve the counselling services that they currently have. Right now, I can confirm that they have 5 full-time resident counsellors in place in Hay River. As of today, there is approximate wait time of about 8 weeks, which is quite a bit. However, there is no wait times for addictions counselling. The length of time on a wait list varies throughout the year. Factors influence the wait times could include vacancies in the positions, urgency of the clients, matching client needs with the specialization of some of our staff. As a note, Mr. Speaker, there are 2 scheduled emergency appointments per day, 5 days a week, and for those clients who need emergency services in Hay River. On top of that, Mr. Speaker, the Hay River Health and Social Services ran an applied suicide intervention skills training course in Hay River from the 14th to 15th of February. They've run a mental health first aid program earlier in December. They're planning another one in August. This is an important tool that we can use to help educate residents, to help them be informed, help break down the stigma that exists around mental health. I'd strongly encourage the member to take it and to share all the information in that mental health first aid program with his constituents. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, we are moving forward with the Youth Mental Health and Addictions Action Plan, which contemplates creating 49 new positions throughout the Northwest Territories. Hay River is part of that plan. Granted, it's towards the end of the 4-year rollout, but it is part of that plan. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Akira Cassie, member Hay River North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate that answer. It's quite detailed. The Minister mentioned there's an 8-week waiting list, but then once people get into counselling, it's still only once a month, maybe once every few weeks, which I believe is inadequate for most people. And the Minister, it was a nice transition, the Minister mentioned the child and youth mental health counselors that will be put into schools. There's still some uncertainty surrounding that, how that's going to roll out in Hay River. Some of the questions are, when will we see this? How many counselors will they be? Who will they work for, the authority or the health department? Where will they be located in the summer, etc.? Could the Minister please provide some detail on this? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with respect to the plan, the Hay River Health and Social Services Authority will have 4 child and youth care counsellors positions as well as 1 clinical supervisor. As the plan indicates, that won't be rolling out until 21-22, which is a ways off. The councillors will be employees of the Hay River Health and Social Services Authority unless we have made progress to bring them into the authority, at which point they'll be employees of the GNWT. The team that's been working this has developed the job descriptions for the child and youth care counsellor positions, and I spoke to that earlier this week with the minister from the Henday. The goal is to find the right people, Mr. Speaker. The goal is to find the right people for the job with the right mix of skills, competencies to meet the needs that the youth are identifying and to meet the requests of the youth to have really qualified people providing these supports. As we implement these positions, Mr. Speaker, across the Northwest Territories, and we learn what's working and what's not working, this may change and we may be able to evolve and continue to strengthen this model as we go. I know the member was concerned about registration. Registration with the Canadian Counselling and Psychotherapy Association is not a requirement for the child and youth counsellors. And I understand that it hasn't actually been an issue if the member has not been an issue with hiring people in Hay River, but if the member has an alternate opinion or information that I need to know, I'm happy to listen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Tadare, Council Member Hay River North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I provided the minister with an email earlier with more detail than I asked in the oral question, so that's where that came from, but I appreciate the answer. And like all things health, the fact that the Hay River Health and Social Services Authority is outside of the territorial authority affects the GNWT's ability to provide the quality mental health care services to the residents in Hay River. And so I'd like to ask the minister, there's commitments made in this House to get the ball rolling on getting that the Health Authority in Hay River into the territorial authority. What progress has been made to that end? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I agree with what the member said. We need to bring the Hay River Health and Social Services Authority into the Territorial Authority so we can provide comprehensive, seamless services to residents of Hay River, Enterprise, Ketladeche, and the surrounding areas. We need to be able to know our residents, regardless of where they're coming from, whether it's from the Decho or other regions, are receiving seamless services through a territorially funded health system. We have been working with the Department of Finance to begin the discussions about what the ultimate cost will be for the pension transfer. We need to have that information before we can take our next step, which would include negotiations and discussions with the Union of Northern Workers, because the employees in Hay River, although they are UNW employees, they're under a separate collective agreement completely. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. It is a mandate of this Assembly. I continue to push it at the Cabinet table, recognizing that there is significant long-term benefits of doing this from a client perspective, but also from a financial perspective. We wouldn't necessarily have to come forward every year with a top-up for the existing pension. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Nundere, Council Member Hay River North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And further to my last question, I know it's complex, and I know that bringing the Hay River Authority into the Territorial Authority probably won't happen until after these negotiations are complete. But I was wondering, does the minister have any sort of timeline that he thinks he could share with us about how long it would take to make this workable? Because I know it is a complex issue. And so best case scenario, would it be 5 years? Would it be 2 years? Could the minister give us a little bit of insight? Thank you, Mr. Chair, or Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish I could give the member a concrete answer on this one. I really do. This is something we know we need to do. But bottom line is, I think getting the work done around the pension would probably take a couple of years to do that. Once we do that, then we have to begin our negotiations with the union. And frankly, I cannot guesstimate or estimate how long the negotiations would take with the union. But it is something we want to get done. It is something we are moving forward towards. As I learn more, I promise the members from Hay River that I will certainly keep them in the loop and informed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Canada, the member Mackenzie Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I brought this issue up a couple of days back. It's the ferry services for Sigachik. Mr. Speaker, the ferry started operating on Wednesday, but as of this moment, our residents in Sigachik still don't have service. So I'd like to ask the minister, when will the ferry start taking traffic for the community of Sigachik? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to update the House on the Sigachik Ferry service as well. Members, correct, we are currently servicing the Nuvik to McPherson route. We had staff out there yesterday working on the ferry landing on the Sigachik side of things. They cleared off some ice. They moved some dry gravel down there to help with the landing, and the ferry tried last night to land there, and there were some issues around it. And my understanding is, as of today's update that I've got on it, later today we are going to try successfully, hopefully, to be able to service the community of Sigachik maybe tonight. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question. Council Member Mackenzie Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the past, the department had the community maintaining the ferry landings, and everything worked well. As soon as the ferry was in the water, the landings were done, and even this spring, the community stepped up and removed the big mountain of ice that was on the ferry landings. So will the minister direct his department to go back to the way things used to be and have the community maintain the landing? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not going to commit to that in the House. I will have a conversation with our superintendent of the region and ask if there's best practices that we can be learning from this going forward, and if there's a benefit to having the community look after the landing, maybe possibly next season, maybe that's an opportunity. But one thing I want to make quite clear on this ferry this year, I want to congratulate the staff in particular of infrastructure, all the hard work they've done. We've installed 4 new engines on this thing. They're up and running well. Transport Canada gladly gave us a certificate to operate this ferry before final inspection because of the great work that the department has done. And I'd also like to update members of the House that this service is actually in almost a week early compared to most seasons. Now, is that due to climate change and such? We're not quite aware of that, but I'm not a scientist, but this is definitely a week early. So I commend the staff for all the great work they've done, and thank you to the community of Sigachik for trying to help out to help get this service up and running, because it's in the best interest of everybody that we get this thing running sooner and later. The Department of Health, the Department of Justice, all these sorts of people, and the residents in the region. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question. Council Member Mackenzie Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yes, the staff did a wonderful job on installing the ferries this year. I'm not questioning that. The only question I have is, will the minister, over the next few months even, work with myself and the community to come up with some agreement to do the landings in the community as it was even a couple of years back? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Infrastructure.
As I said, I will talk to my superintendent, and we'll make sure that the member from the region's in the loop here, and we'll have those discussions, and we'll see what we can do moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, the member Satu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my question here today is for the Minister of Health on dialysis services. We have a new building that is very welcomed by the community in Norman Wells, providing services to the community and surrounding communities. A very well state-of-the-art building, I must add. We had several tours there, and I heard complimentary feedback from the general public. However, there's a lacking service for dialysis treatment. Will the minister elaborate if there's any plans on providing that dialysis services to the residents of the Satu from the facility in Norman Wells? Must see, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, dialysis is a very complex process requiring some very complex machinery and highly trained individuals who actually know how to operate the machines, and as well as to clean the machines, which require a significant cleaning between use to ensure that there's no cross-contamination. It isn't as simple as putting in a machine and putting in a nurse. You need to have a significant amount of backup staff. If you're going to offer it in a facility, you need to make sure that you have enough staff complements so that if somebody's sick, there's proper backfill. Otherwise, it could put an individual or a client at risk of harm or worse. Mr. Speaker, we're focused on providing supports to our residents regardless of where they live. We're continuing to explore how we can work with Alberta to expand peritoneal dialysis, which can be done in homes where the individual's particular condition will allow. I hear the member's desire, but we're not in a position to put a dialysis machine and a dialysis service in the new hospital, the new health centre at this time. Thank you.
Merci. Oral question, Nakira Cassie, member Satu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to the Minister for that. That clears the air on concerns and residents that I know of that have that illness. Will the Minister look at providing options paper on moving forward when this could be done, if any? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, since we've moved to a single authority, we have a lot of opportunities to really dig into the system to see how things are working and to have a larger perspective or a larger vision of how we want to move forward. One of the things that we clearly need to do is primary care reform. This is something that needs to be done at a territorial level, and it has to look at all the types of programs and services that are being delivered in all areas of the Northwest Territories. Things like dialysis, midwifery, and other things are certainly part of this overarching primary care review, as well as just how we provide our services at the front line. I'm not going to commit to doing a specific review on dialysis in the SAT2, but I will commit to the member that we are working on making improvements to the system through a primary care approach, which will benefit all residents. We'll focus on the clients rather than the system. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Cassie, member Satu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thanks to the Minister for that reply here. I look forward in working with the department to develop a methodology or a model to see if that service could be provided from the facility in Norman Wells. The cost of the equipment, the cost of training, the cost of personnel, have that model discussion paper. Not to say that we're going to do it, just to educate ourselves if that service can be provided at some point in time for discussion purposes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Health and Social Service.
Mr. Speaker, just the other day I was asked questions about expanding one shift in Hay River for the dialysis services that were there, recognizing that will require additional staff, additional backup. We have some early numbers on that, and adding a shift could be as much as $600,000. When you think about providing dialysis services in a community like Norman Wells, it would require a number of machines because you can't have one. You have to have a backup machine even if you don't use it. You have to have adequate numbers of staff. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to deliver a program where the cost benefit of that may not be there. I'm not saying the population of the Northwest Territories isn't going to grow and we won't get there, but as a system that's running a $90 million accumulated deficit, we have to think carefully about how we're investing our money, and we need to know that that money is improving the health or supporting the health care of our residents, and that we're getting best value for money. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question. Nikade Kani, the member Nehende.
Speaker. Early in the week, I was asking questions for the Minister of Finance about taxation in Fort Liard and that. And some of the questions that we heard during my visits into the communities is in regards to when you turn 65, you have the opportunity to have the taxes waived. So I guess the first question to the Minister is, how does the department actually inform people when they turn 65 that their taxations is going to be waived? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members right, there is a program, Senior Citizen Disabled Tax Property Tax Relief, and it is a program of the Department of Municipal Community Affairs. It's promoted to NWT residents through government service offices, community government offices, and the MACA website, MACA regional offices, as well as through the NWT Housing Corporation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Akira Cassie, member Nehende.
Speaker, and I thank the minister for that answer. Can the minister advise if the departments or the finance department actually sends out a letter to the resident as soon as they turn 65 that this benefit is available? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure if we actually sent them a letter. I'd have to follow up and see if we do. If we don't, then it's application-based, so people know that once they turn 65 and they're eligible for this, then they must submit an application to MACA and then submit, my understanding is submit an application to MACA annually to receive the benefit. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Tadade Ekasi member Nehende.
And I thank the minister for that answer. Can the Minister of Finance make a commitment to work with the Minister of MACA to get this information out? I understand it's application-based, but I think we need to get this information out to our elders, and if we can, get the department to send a letter to them so that we can actually make sure our elders get this benefit. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Finance.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, no, I will work with the Minister of Municipal Community Affairs as well. I think the most important part here is working with the community governments because they're the ones that actually know their community the best and they know who may be eligible or who might be coming up soon. So if we are able to send them a package that they can share with the members in the community, and I think it'll carry a lot more weight coming from the community, the government service officers do great work in the communities, and they should be a conduit for getting that information out to the elders, to the community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Nudide Ekasi member Nehende.
Speaker, and I thank the minister for that. I have to agree with you. The government service officers do a great job in my writing, and I believe they do a great job in everybody else's writing. And I'm hopeful, and I know that people do work with that way. But again, it's just about getting that information out there. The other problem is that when elders don't find out about it, I've had one elder that was 60 or 70 years old when she finally found out about it and asked the question, is this program retroactive, and if it isn't, why not? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my understanding is this is not retroactive, and again, if maybe we need to make sure that the information's out there so people are aware that as soon as they turn 65, they're eligible for this particular program. But quick answer to the member's question is no, it's not retroactive. It's based on applications that they submit to the department every year. Thank you, Speaker.
Merci. Time for oral question has expired. At this time, I'd like to call for a short break. Merci. Okay, members, we left off from the oral questions. Next item is a written question. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. My question is for the Minister of Industry, Tourism and Investment, who has responsibility for the socio-economic benefits of mining. The potential layoffs by Dominion Diamond of 150 unionized workers at the Ekati mine raises serious issues regarding the costs and lost revenues to GNWT and economic impacts of such layoffs. Can the Minister describe the steps taken by GNWT to deal with the mass layoffs of workers? And 1, does GNWT have information about worker absenteeism at the Ekati mine and its impact on the operations of the Ekati mine? 2, what costs will be incurred for retraining, unemployment, and income assistance supports that may be required? 3, provide an estimate of the loss of tax revenue, including personal income tax, payroll tax, and transfer payments, and any other GNWT revenue as a result of the loss of 150 jobs. And 4, provide an estimate of the economic impact from the loss of 150 jobs in local gross domestic product expenditures, including purchases of regional transportation and expediting services. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Written questions. Written questions. Returns to written questions. Returns to written questions. Replies to Commissioner's opening address. Replies to Commissioner's opening address. Petitions. Petitions. Reports to Standing Special Committee. Reports to Standing Special Committee. Reports on Committee Review of Bills. Reports on Committee on Review of Bills. Tabling of documents. Minister of Health and Social Service.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document entitled Government of the Northwest Territories Response to Committee Report 4-18-3, the report on adult residential addiction treatment facilities tour 2017. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Tabling of documents. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to table the following 2 documents entitled Interactivity Transfers exceeding $250,000, April 1st, 2017 to March 31st, 2018, and the 2030 NWT Climate Change Strategic Framework. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Tabling of documents. Minister of Environment and Natural Resources. Oh, sorry. Minister of Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document entitled 2030 Energy Strategy, Energy Action Plan 2018-2021. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Tabling of documents. Minister of NWT Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document entitled 2018-2019 Consolidated Operating Budget, Northwest Territories Housing Corporation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Tabling of documents. Pursuant to Section 5 of the Indemnities, Allowances, and Expense Regulations of the Legislative Assembly and Executive Council Act, I wish to table a summary of members' absences for the period February 7, 2018 to May 23, 2018. Notices of motion. Notices of motion. Notices of motion for first reading of bills. Notices of motion for first reading of bills. Motions. Member for Young Life Centre.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Great Slave, that notwithstanding Rule 4, when this House adjourns on June 1st, 2018, it shall be adjourned until Thursday, October 11th, 2018. And further, that at any point prior to October 11th, 2018, if the Speaker is satisfied, after consultation with the Executive Council and members of the Legislative Assembly, that the public interest requires that the House should meet at an earlier time during the adjournment, the Speaker may give notice, and thereupon the House shall meet at the time stated in such notice and shall transact its business as it has been duly adjourned to that time. And I would like to wish you and all my other colleagues a relaxing and safe summer break. Thank you.
Motions in order. To the motion. Questions been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carried. Merci. Motions. Motions. First reading of bills. First reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the honourable member for Hay River South, that Bill 20, Ombudsperson Act, be read for the second time. This bill provides for the appointment of an ombudsperson as an officer of the legislature. This bill establishes the mandate of the ombudsperson, which will be to investigate complaints about the administrative fairness of government practices to promote fair, reasonable, and equitable government administration. Some of the key matters addressed by this bill include the following: requiring that the Commissioner, on the recommendation of the Legislative Assembly, appoint an ombudsperson; conferring powers and duties on the ombudsperson for the purpose of fulfilling the ombudsperson's mandate; setting out how complaints can be made by a person to the ombudsperson; and setting out how investigations are to be conducted by the ombudsperson. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Motions in order to the principle of the bill. Question's been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carried. Bill 20 has had a second reading. It's now referred to a standing committee. Second reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Consideration Committee of the Whole Bills and Other Matters. Minister Statement 1-18.3. Minister Statement 19-18.3. Committee Report 8-18.3. With Member Hay River North in the chair.
I now call the Committee of the Whole to order. What is the wish of committee? Mr. Beaulieu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, committee wishes to consider Minister Statement 1-18(3), North Slave Correctional Complex inmate concerns, and Committee Report 8-18(3), report on the review of the 2016-2017 public accounts. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Beaulieu. Does committee agree? Thank you, committee. We have agreed to consider Minister Statement 1-18(3), North Slave Correctional Complex inmate concerns. I'll open it up to committee for comments or questions. Seeing none from committee, does committee concur that this concludes our consideration of Minister Statement 1-18(3)? Thank you, committee. Committee, we have next agreed to consider Committee Report 8-18(3), the report on the review of the public accounts. I will go to the chair of the standing committee, which consider the report or which author the report for any opening comments. Mr. Testart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yesterday, the Standing Committee on Government Operations presented its report on the review of the 2016-2017 public accounts of the Government of the Northwest Territories. The committee report included 8 recommendations, and I look forward to the opportunity to discuss the report and recommendations in Committee of the Whole today. Members of the committee may have individual comments. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Testart. I will open the floor to any general comments on the report. Do we have general comments from the committee? Seeing none, we will move into the detail. As members are aware, these reports, the recommendations in these reports are usually moved as motions. For those following along, the first recommendation can be found on page 8 of 21. Mr. Testart.
Mr. Chair, I move that this Assembly recommends that the Office of the Comptroller General and the Department of Finance consider and report back to the Standing Committee on Government Operations on the utility of entering into service agreements or memoranda of understanding with GNWT boards, agencies, or other entities requiring support or assistance to complete their year-end financial reporting as required under the Financial Administration Act. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Testart. There is a motion on the floor. The motion is being distributed. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you, Mr. Testart. Mr. Testart.
Mr. Chair, I move that this Assembly recommends that the Government of the Northwest Territories considers bringing together all of its information about P3 projects under one note in the Consolidated Public Accounts until such time as the new Canadian Public Sector Accounting Board standards on the accounting treatment of P3 projects are put in place. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Testart. There's a motion. The motion is in order. To the motion. Mr. Testart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So currently in the public accounts, the P3 information is scattered across several schedules. And in our discussions with the Auditor General, we understand that their recommendations were to move all of that P3 information into one note in the consolidated public accounts, and that would give easier access and understanding of what the GNWT's P3 commitments are, and present the information clearly to interested members of the public. Now, it should be noted that Canadian public sector accounting treatment of P3 projects is still in flux, and there has not been a consistent practice that's been developed. So many jurisdictions are struggling with this challenge of how to properly present on P3 projects in public accounts. Despite the Auditor General's interest in this, they were willing to accept that the information was present in the public accounts, and the committee certainly isn't of the opinion that that information was not there. Committee's interest is ensuring that all the information is placed under one note, so it's much easier to find and much easier to understand to someone who may be flipping through the public accounts and looking for P3 commitments. So I hope that this motion passes and the government will consider our recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Testart. To the motion, Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I support this recommendation. I was happy to sit in on the public accounts review. I'm not a committee member, but this is, I think, one of their key recommendations, that the current information about P3s is spread across 4 different parts of the public accounts. I want to give credit to the Comptroller General for improving the amount of information that's now disclosed about P3s, but bringing that together in one place, as this recommendation is suggesting, I think is certainly in the spirit of openness and transparency that our government has ascribed to. So I support this motion. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Mr. Testart.
Mr. Chair, I move that this Assembly recommends that the Government of the Northwest Territories make GNWT's inventory of contaminated sites available online, modeled upon, and with a level of disclosure comparable to the federal contaminated sites inventory maintained by the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Testart. There is a motion on the floor. The motion is in order. To the motion, Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I've had cause to use the federal contaminated sites inventory. It's a very detailed listing for individual waste sites, contaminated sites by department. You can see the status of the assessment and the remediation work that's been done on each of those sites over about a 10-year period, the remaining outstanding liability. It's a very good resource, and I guess I would urge that our government move towards greater disclosure, transparency around these matters. And I'm not saying that we have to adopt the federal system right away, but it's something that we should be moving towards. And I would urge the Minister of Finance to have a look at that website and see what's there. We're going to inherit a number of these sites, or at least management of these sites, pursuant to the devolution agreement. and we need to get our house in order to make sure that we can properly assess the liabilities and make sure that remediation takes place in a timely fashion. And if you don't have that stuff together in one place, as the federal government does, it can be awkward at best. So I support this motion. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. To the motion, the question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is carried. Mr. Testart.
Mr. Chair, I move that this Assembly recommends that the Government of the Northwest Territories, giving consideration to the observations made in this committee report, strive to improve upon the information in the financial statement discussion and analysis section of the public accounts that indicates how the GNWT has met the provisions of the fiscal responsibility policy related to debt servicing and infrastructure financing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Testart. There's a motion on the floor. Motion is in order. Mr. Testart, to the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I do want to commend the the Office of the Comptroller General for taking previous year's reviews seriously and bringing more detailed analysis of the fiscal responsibility policy into the public accounts. It's the committee's understanding that this information has not been available previously, and as it is the cornerstone of our government's fiscal policies or budgeting policies, the committee feels very strongly that this information needs to be clearly presented to the public. And given that the responsibility policy is an accountability mechanism as much as it is a limit on spending, it's therefore imperative that we have clear accounting of it, so it's clear that the government is living up to its promises, commitments, and policies. And where we feel that it can be improved is much of the information was quite confusing to the committee on first read. When we were able to receive evidence from the Comptroller General on around the financial statement discussion and analysis section, we were able to learn where those numbers come from and better understand them. But not everyone in the public has the benefit of sitting down with the Comptroller General. So the committee feels that if we can find a way to clarify this and make the information, the facts and figures relatable, easy to find, and understandable, it will ultimately result in a more readable and consistent document, and allow for the goals of accountability and transparency that are set out in the policy to be properly realized in the public accounts document. So I support this motion, and I hope others will as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Testart. Mr. O'Reilly.
Yeah, I too want to give credit to the Comptroller General for improving the presentation of information about compliance with the fiscal responsibility policy. Our research staff had a lot of difficulty trying to replicate or duplicate the set of calculations and pull it where information had been pulled from and so on. And that's what I think this recommendation is really about, is making sure that the information about compliance is verifiable, it's reproducible by a third party, including the Standing Committee on Government Operations. But it's really about transparency and accountability, and I think the information is in the public accounts, but it's not set out in as clear a manner as it could be to allow for anyone to verify that we are indeed in compliance with the policy. So that's what the recommendation is aimed at, and I support it. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. To the motion, the question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is carried. Mr. Testart.
Mr. Chair, I move that this Assembly recommends that the Department of Finance give consideration to reporting student loan remissions in another schedule in the public accounts, separate from the schedule reporting bad debt write-offs and forgiveness. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Testart. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this really springs from an issue that I've raised several times in this House about how the names individual names and student loan remission amounts are listed in a schedule in the public accounts. And I've characterized that as an unfair and undue invasion of privacy. And in fact, the Privacy Commissioner herself has characterized it in the same way. So when the Commissioner appeared before the Standing Committee to present her last report, we asked the Commissioner about this, and she did provide us with copies of a couple of letters that she has sent to the Comptroller General on this subject. And I just want to sort of highlight a few points here that from this correspondence. She says that the disclosure of the information in question, which pairs names with the amount of loans received and the amount of these loans for loan remissions, has resulted in a forgiveness of all or part of that debt, clearly amounts to a disclosure of personal information. She goes on to say, is it really necessary for individuals to give up their right to privacy in order to take advantage of the remission program? And in a second letter, she says, there's nothing that I could find in the Act which requires that the names of those students involved need to be included in the public accounts report. That's coming from the Privacy Commissioner herself, who happens to be a lawyer. But this is just bad practice in terms of, it does certainly, in no way does it encourage our students to seek loan remissions. And I think it really, there's a perception that they're categorized in the same grouping of bad debts and write-offs and forgiveness. And that's clearly not what this is about. And there's no legal requirement for this. And I really want to encourage the Minister of Finance to stop this practice. So that's what this is aimed at. The next recommendation is also aimed at this matter, but we've got to stop this. This does not encourage our students to seek student loan remissions. And I think and I've said this is an unfair invasion of their privacy, and it needs to stop. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. To the motion. Order. Order. Now that order has been restored, would the House like the question put to it? All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Mr. Testart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that this Assembly recommends that the Department of Finance, upon completion of a privacy impact assessment in 2018-2019 by the Information and Privacy Commissioner, and having considered the committee's suggestions contained in this report, reconsider amending the non-consolidated schedule of bad debt write-offs, forgiveness, and student loan remissions to better protect the privacy of individuals. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Testart. There's a motion on the floor to the motion. Mr. Testart.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank the honourable member for Frame Lake for really championing this issue of student loan remissions in the public accounts. The Standing Committee, of course, shares these concerns, and in addition to the previous motion that has just been carried, this further recommends that a privacy assessment be taken up, and perhaps that based on that assessment, the whole issue of student loan remissions be reconsidered. So rather than just moving them to a separate schedule, this recommendation is more about removing them altogether as individuals named in the public accounts. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Testart. To the motion, Mr. O'Reilly.
Mr. Chair, I forgot about one other point I wanted to make. In our review of public accounts, we found that in previous years there was some disclosure of bad debt write-offs. that were just sort of consolidated an amount. There was no individual listing of where those bad debts came from. And that occurred in more than one of the public accounts over the last 8 or 10 years. So if we can do that for bad debt, why can't we do that for student loan remissions? Just have a single figure. There's no need to disclose individual names and amounts. So I'm encouraging the Minister of Finance to work with his staff to use the same method that's currently used for bad debts for student loan remissions. If you can't list who the bad debts are from, you shouldn't be listing the students individually as well. So I want to encourage the Minister of Finance to stop that invasion of privacy. And by the way, it's not done in any other jurisdiction in Canada except for Nunavut, and that's just an artifact of division. So stop that practice, please. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. To the motion, the question has been called. All those in favour? All those opposed? Motion is carried. Mr. Testart.
Mr. Chair, I move that this Assembly recommends that the Department of Finance continue its efforts to ensure that all annual reports required under the GNWT's Planning and Accountability Framework be translated in French and made available to the public in a timely manner. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Testart. There's a motion on the floor. To the motion, the question has been called. All those in favour? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Mr. Testart.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I move that this Assembly recommends that the Government of the Northwest Territories provide a response to this report within 120 days. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Testart. There's a motion on the floor. To the motion, the question has been called. All those in favour? All those opposed? Let the record show there was one member who opposed. The motion is carried. What is the wish? I'm sorry, committee. Does committee agree that this concludes our consideration of committee report 8-18(3), Standing Committee on Government Operations report on the review of the 2016-2017 public account of the Government of the Northwest Territories? Thank you, committee. What is the wish of committee now? Mr. Beaulieu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that the chair rise and report progress. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Beaulieu. There's a motion on the floor to report progress. All those in favour? All those opposed? The motion is carried. I will rise and report progress. But first, it's been a long week here. I think this might be the longest week we've had in this House, and so I really have to thank everyone who's involved to make it happen, the translators, all the pages, everyone in the back for sticking around and helping us through some very long nights while we did some very important work. So thank you to everyone.
May I have the report, Member Hay River North?
Mr. Speaker, your committee has been considering Minister Statement 1-18(3) North Slave Correctional Complex Inmate Concerns and Committee Report 8-18(3) Standing Committee on Government Operations Report on the review of the 2016-2017 public accounts of the Government of the Northwest Territories. I would like to report progress with 8 motions being adopted and that consideration of Minister Statement 1-18(3) and Committee Report 8-18(3) are concluded. And Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the Committee of the Whole be concurred with.
Do I have a seconder? Member for Decho. Motion's in order. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carried. Massey. Third reading of bills. Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the honourable member for Hay River South, that Bill 6, Cannabis Legalization and Regulation Implementation Act be read for the third time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Motion's in order. To the motion. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to request a recorded vote. Thank you.
To the motion? Question's been called. Member requested for a recorded vote. All those in favor, please stand.
Member for Tabacha, member for Hay River North, the member for Mackenzie Delta, the member for Satu, the member for Yellowknife North, the member for Cam Lake, the member for Tunada-Welladay, the member for Nahende, the member for Frame Lake, the member for Yellowknife Centre, the member for Decho, the member for Nunakput, the member for Inuvik Boot Lake, the member for Range Lake, the member for Great Slave, the member for Inuvik Twin Lakes, the member for Hay River South.
Well done. Massey. All those opposed, please stand. All those abstain, please stand. The results of the recorded vote, 17 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstention. Motion carried. Bill 6 has had a third reading. Third reading of bills. Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the honourable member for Hay River South, that Bill 19, an act to amend the Revolving Funds Act, be read for the third time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would request a recorded vote.
Member requested for a recorded vote. Motion's in order. To the motion. Question's been called. All those in favor, please stand.
The member for Inuvik Twin Lakes, member for Hay River South, member for Tabacha, member for Hay River North, member for Mackenzie Delta, member for Satu, member for Yellowknife North, member for Cam Lake, member for Tunada-Welladay, member for Nahende, member for Frame Lake, member for Yellowknife Centre, member for Decho, and member for Nunakput, and member for Inuvik Boot Lake, the member for Range Lake, and the member for Great Slave.
Massey. All those opposed, please stand. All those abstain, please stand. The results of the recorded vote, 17 in favor, 0 against, 0 abstention. Motion carried. Bill 19 has had a third reading. Third reading of bills. Minister of Industry, Tourism, and Investment.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the honourable member for Inuvik Twin Lakes, that Bill 21, an act to amend the Northwest Territories Business Development and Investment Corporation Act, be read for the third time. Mr. Speaker, I request a recorded vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member requested for a recorded vote. Motion's in order. To the motion. Question's been called. All those in favor, please stand.
The member for Hay River South, the member for Tabacha,
the member for Hay River North, the member for Mackenzie Delta, the member for Sawtoo, the member for Yellowknife North, the member for Cam Lake, the member for Tunaday-Welladay, the member for Nahende, the member for Frame Lake, the member for Yellowknife Centre, the member for Decho, the member for Nunakput, the member for Inuvik Boot Lake, the member for Range Lake, the member for Great Slave, the member for Inuvik Twin Lakes.
All those opposed, please stand. All those abstain, please stand. The results of the recorded vote, 17 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstention. Motion carried. Bill 21 has had its third reading. Third reading of bills. Third reading of bills. Mr. Clerk, will you ascertain if the Commissioner Margaret Thom is ready to enter the chamber to assent to bills?
Please be seated.
Mr. Speaker, members of the Legislative Assembly, good afternoon. Masi kashu ejon kuen kadanisyon kuji agala da naiwen taga sitzeda masinethe. Ajon naigan taga sinie kutse kutli jon natsetegoa kutli agalanta ishigashu masinainithe. Thank you. I'm honored to be in this special place with all of you. It is great to see all of you, and thank you for your hard work to better the lives of the Northerners. With deep respect, I would like to acknowledge and honor the sacred land and traditional territory of Chief Dry Geese, and to be forever grateful for allowing us to do our work in this territory. As we enjoy these warmer months, I would like to wish each of you a safe, healthy, and happy summer as you take your break and enjoy quality time with your families. Please travel safely on the land, on our waters, in the air, and on our highways as you continue working for the betterment of all Northerners. Encourage and remind your families, friends, and people in your community to be safe out on the land, to wear personal flotation devices or PDFs when traveling by boat on our waterways. As this sitting comes to a close, I wish the members of this House good health and happiness as you enjoy the summer and continue your work in your constituencies. Now, as Commissioner of the Northwest Territories, I am pleased to assent to the following bills. Bill 5, an act to amend the Summary Conviction Procedures Act. Bill 6, Cannabis Legalization and Regulation Implementation Act. Bill 19, an act to amend the Revolving Funds Act. Bill 22, Supplementary Appropriation Act, bracket, Infrastructure Expenditure, bracket, number 2, 2018-2019. Bill 23, Supplementary Appropriation Act, bracket, Operations Expenditures, bracket, number 2, 2018-2019. Merci Cho. Thank you. Kuanani. Merci beaucoup. Juan.
Order.
Another bill added. Bill 21, an act to amend the Northwest Territories Business Development and Investment Corporation Act.
Order. Please be seated. Members, the dear some Commissioner Gugainda, Margaret Tamuye, Massi Wapunde. The Sakuga Laginda, the pages go again. The dear Lanat Saga Laginda, the dear Massi gets a dear dark ground. I saw Tati again, the Zanta to go again ground. Meryl Sundberg, Sarah Clary, Pamanka, is Annie Goose. Tati again, the gate then they will hold the other tickets as on the Goyachi go now was on Calcutta on the a year, the Nezin that's out there on the Tati and the go here, Zanta, 다 라나츠사 깨알라게 주게서는데 이거 마시게서 다 그런데 디어다 세션 다 세자 타다 무슨 거노 다 라나츠사 깨진데온데 다 어쩌다니데 중화자 거다 다 아시아존 야치다 다 세자 키온데 아스나 차가나 크롤라데 그래서 디즈로 인다살라나 차가나 크롤라나호 시켜라자 doesn't down데 너지 다셔서 케네지 시켜라자 다나호 깨제 워호딜로데 하노 나히어다 나오나이 크롤라 나나 크롤라다 우케알라데오데 아이존다 마시 나해 호데 나 힌즈구야 께 다디클게 나이네게 나데오데 나이네게 나데오다 두니게 아데오데 다 후타테 클게데 셔서 디오게 고데 다 고네게 나자데오데 두고 다 고긴 혼선네 야치가 gello데 아이가 핫건즈나 찐데가 신세자 디오데 하자 디가데 디클게 나이네게 나데 자 휘나히 홍데 하포데 ai tao in ta khát chạy tiền in sao khoa gun nè anh sao ho nên xin để cái gì ai tao in ta dân nào để cho ta nên xin tu nên này có tiền để học phong để colleagues, I'd like to extend my appreciation of this House to the Commissioner, Margaret and Tom. It was a pleasure to have you in the House here today. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank all the pages throughout the past week and a half that served us during this session. Our youth are our future. We've always stated that. Our greatest resources. It is an honor to share this chamber with you, all of you. And finally, I'd like to thank all the interpreters who have been with us throughout this session. Some days were long, but they were here with us. Miro Sumberg, Sarah Clary, Tom Manka, and Annie Goose. Our official languages are an important part of our heritage, our culture, and our identity. The hard work and dedication of interpreters make it possible for us to share, use, and celebrate our official languages on a daily basis during our session. To our interpreters, thank you for all the invaluable services that you provide each and every day. Masicho for that. And colleagues, although this is a short setting, but it was not an easy one. During the past 2 weeks, you have achieved a great deal, and you should feel proud of the week that you have done to do so. The topics we've considered have been very challenging. The days have been long, and we have not always been able to see eye to eye. Although we did not always agree, we were able to work together with honor and dignity as we work to serve our constituencies, the Northwest Territories, and the people across the board. I commend all members of this House for their dedication and hard work. I also like to wish you safe travels as you return to your constituencies. Masi, colleagues. As we prepare for another beautiful northern summer, I'd like to remind you to get out and experience all that you can this territory has to offer. We are fortunate to live in one of the most beautiful regions of the country, and we should not take that for granted at all. Whether you are out on the land, on the water, visiting one of the parks, or enjoying one of the summer festivals, or during the summer assemblies, please do safely and enjoy what this territory has to offer. And colleagues, this House, as you know, will not sit again until October. However, I know that all of you will be busy with your constituencies, with the committee works, and the ongoing business of this government. And also there's a great deal of commitments that have been made by this government. And most importantly, spend time with your family, with your friends, with community members, with your constituencies. Our profession often requires us to work long hours, as we witnessed yesterday and the days before. Spend days and weeks away from the people who matters most to us, all of us. Please enjoy the summer recess and make time for those who give so much so we can serve those who have elected us. With that in mind, I'd just like to say merci for your invaluable contribution. Mr. Clerk, orders of the day.
Orders of the day for Thursday, October 11th, 2018, 1:30 p.m. Prayer, minister statements, member statements, returns to oral questions, recognition of visitors in the gallery, acknowledgements, oral questions, returns to written questions, replies to Commissioner's opening address, petitions, reports of standing and special committees, reports of committees on the review of bills, tabling of documents, notices of motion for first reading of bills, motions, first reading of bills, second reading of bills, consideration in committee of the whole of bills and other matters, Minister Statement 19-18.3, report of committee of the whole, third reading of bills, orders of the day.
Mr. Clerk. This House stands adjourned until Thursday, October 11, 2018 at 1:30 p.m.